Everybody, welcome to the February 7th staff meeting, workshop, I think we're calling them. So anyway, thanks. We've got quite a crowd here. So with that, we'll get right to
we have quite a crowd. We're going to talk about opioid. So there's two items today. One is the discussion of opioid money that's being settled on the county from our historical lawsuit. And then the second topic is the admin building. So it's a couple of heavy duty topics here. The reason the room is full is Justin Martin will start the discussion of the opioid money. He'll start it off and kind of lay out legal parameters and what we can, maybe can't spend. He'll give that information of the day, what we can or can't spend money on, and any technical questions that the commission may have legally regarding the dollars. And then I thought we'd spend some time and hear from, I've invited every department that could potentially have a touch point with substance abuse. So that's why we have a crowd behind us. I thought we'd have each director or their designee, that's 7 or 8 departments, spend just a minute or two and kind of talk about what they could use opioid money for in their operations to mitigate the situation, what the design of the money is for. And that's kind of what we'll roll through here over the next half hour or so. So, Justin, you can start.
Thank you. Morning, Justin.
Morning, Chairman, Commissioner Justin Wagner, Deputy County Counselor. Tom gave a good introduction there. We're going to talk about the opioid settlement. First, just some background. In December of 2017, the Board of County Commissioners filed a lawsuit against opioid distributors and manufacturers. Sedgwick County was certainly not the first municipality to do this, as several other municipalities around the country had already done this before we did so. The basis for the lawsuit was really the additional costs that Sedgwick County and its taxpayers had incurred due to services that the county had to provide in response to the opioid epidemic. This includes, as County Manager mentioned, a lot of our departments that had to provide additional services as a result of essentially the claim was overprescription of opioids and overdistribution of opioids within Sedgwick County. And it's worth noting this was especially complex, multi-state, multi-party litigation. There was some reference by one of the judges, I believe it was, as this being perhaps the most complex civil litigation ever in the United States court system. Because there were, I think, hundreds of thousands of municipalities that ended up joining the suit. Ultimately, attorneys general from all 50 states ended up reaching settlement agreements with different parties who are involved. There have been bankruptcies by several of the companies. There have been, again, settlement agreements with a lot of money at stake. And that's the reason we're talking about it today. Alongside with that, the bottom bullet point on this slide indicates that the Kansas legislature in 2021 passed the Kansas Fights Addiction Act. What that does is it really empowered the Kansas Attorney General to reach these settlement agreements. Next slide here. The Kansas Attorney General was authorized to settle these claims on behalf of municipalities with some qualifications. As a municipality, you can either opt into the settlement or not opt in. As was the case with really, I think, every large municipality within Kansas, the Board of County Commissioners in December of 2021 did opt into that settlement. And under the Kansas Fights Addiction Act, the money that the Kansas Attorney General would reach in the settlement agreement, 75% of it would go to the state of Kansas to the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund. And then 25% would be distributed to municipalities within Kansas, with half of that going to cities, and half of it going to counties. So essentially 12.5% of the settlement proceeds could be distributed amongst counties around the state of Kansas. It is worth noting that because Sedgwick County was a litigant county, we're actually entitled to more money under that act than if we hadn't filed a lawsuit. So it's a good decision in 2017 by the county to join the lawsuit, as it enables more funds to be received by Sedgwick County. And then the Kansas Fights Addiction Act also clarified that any money a municipality receives under the settlements would need to be spent pursuant to an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, entered into between that municipality and the Kansas Attorney General. And Sedgwick County, like all the other municipalities who participated in this, did enter into one of those in December of 2021. All right, so now a number of claims have begun to settle over the last year or so. When this settlement was entered into in December 2021, it was a very rough estimate that the county could receive approximately $3.8 million over a total of up to 18 years. A number of these lawsuits have been the settlements allowed parties to front load their payments they're paying and pay less money, and so that's happened. To date, Sedgwick County has received $1.1 million approximately, the exact number there on the slide. We got $97,000 last year. We just recently, last week or so, received the other just over $1 million. And under the Kansas Fights Addiction Act, there are two different ways that Sedgwick County can utilize these funds. The first would be for projects and activities that prevent, reduce, treat, or mitigate the effects of substance abuse and addiction. And then the second would be the reimbursement of the county for previous expenses that related to substance abuse mitigation. And you can obviously do a combination of the two of those as well. So it doesn't have to be entirely one or the other. And the MOU with the Attorney General does indicate that municipalities can pool this money together for joint projects if that's something that their governing bodies wish to do. As I noted before, 75% of the opioid settlement funds were received by the state, placing the Kansas Fights Addiction Fund. This fund is administered by an 11-member body called the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. Their members are appointed by a number of state officials, whether it's the AG, the governor, leadership in the legislature. But they have convened, they've had at least 2 meetings so far. When I last checked a couple of weeks ago, that fund had $34 million in it. The Grant Review Board is tasked with considering and approving grants of settlement funds. And the board has been appointed again, and they've completed a statewide needs assessment at this point. In some communications that I've had with the AG's office on this, it's been indicated that they're planning tentatively to go out for an RFP for approximately $3 million in March, with a planned second RFP for approximately $2 million later in 2023. It's worth noting that money isn't limited only to municipalities. That money can go to municipalities, private sector. It is worth noting that preference is given to entities not otherwise receiving opioid settlement funds. So to a certain extent, the county is probably at a disadvantage relative to other parties who may seek that money because we're obviously receiving other money to settle. This money cannot be used for reimbursement of past expenses. So it's only forward looking for projects that would, again, prevent, reduce, treat, or mitigate substance abuse. And also on those RFPs that I mentioned, the state's going to consider, they're considering a $200,000 cap per award, at least on their first round of these. Of course, that's only $5 million of the $34 million they've already received. So that it sounds like they're going to be issuing future RFPs as well. And with that, commissioners, I would first open it to see if you have any questions on kind of how the parameters on how this money can be spent. And if you don't have any other questions, I'll turn it over to Tom and other county staff.
I got a question or two, but go ahead. Okay, I just want maybe for Commissioner, I'll just go through a couple of comments. For historic reasons, we did decide to opt in. People ask, why did we not opt out and take it on? And the great discussion we had during that time, and it was going to be very expensive. We were going to have to be a Lone Ranger fighting. And although maybe the award, who knew, too many questions. So it was easier for us after consideration to decide to approve to opt in. And that's just trying for your benefit on the historic. I got a couple of questions. So related to the RFP that the state might be doing, in anticipation that you may get questions, is this something that Recovery Connect could be aware of and refer? When we get questions, we try to refer them to Recovery Connect.
I might
Connect it.
defer that. Tom might be more.
I'm going to try to because I think contractually, I would be in hindsight, on that, but then the contractually.
So when it comes time when those opioid grants are made available, yes, Recovery Connect could potentially be used of the nonprofit, an individual or business pursue those grant opportunities.
And Chairman, I would note, as I understand it at this point, the state board handling those funds is planning on coming up with an RFP form. I got a draft copy of it in the AG's office, and it's I think some of the intent there is to make it not overly complex for entities to be able to apply for this funding. Because a lot of times you'll see places that don't have a form like that, or where it's much more complex. So I think there is an intent on their part to, not saying that companies couldn't go out and hire, any entities to help them with that process, but I do think the state's trying to make it a little bit user friendly, perhaps.
Commissioner Davis?
Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, let me go back a little bit further in time. Commissioner Howell and I were on the board back in 2017, and we had some attorneys approach us and ask if we'd like to enter into a class action suit against the pharmaceutical and the distributors, mainly the distributors. And as the year or so pressed on, and we talked more with our attorneys, we learned that it was about 40 million that we were going to get out of this opioid settlement. And then as the year pressed on, and keep in mind the cigarette settlement with the state of Kansas several years ago, where that they said, oh, we're going to take all the local people, and then the state took it all and kept it all. Okay, so I was very dismayed when the state suddenly came in and said, oh, well, we're going to take care of this for you, and we'll make sure that we get some to you, and then we're going to create this big fund, and you can apply for funding out of this big fund. So our $40 million now turned, we've got about $1 million so far. And then on top of that, well, they've got 34 million sitting there. And they said, oh, by the way, we're going to put out an RFP for 3 million. And oh, by the way, all you people that entered it earlier, you can't apply for it. So it's a typical state grab of the funding that we've seen in the past. I'm very dismayed with what's happening. As we move forward, we've got a lot of need here from all of the different agencies are represented. And they've been fighting this opioid problem for years, even before 2017, when we entered into our initial lawsuit. And now we've got about $1 million, and we've got a lot of need to try and find out how to use $1 million. So I just want everybody to know I am very dismayed with the process. I think the state, they put us over a barrel, said, hey, if you don't enter into this compact with the rest of the state, your chance of getting anything is pretty slim. Well, it turns out what we got was pretty slim. So I just wanted to make a statement that I am dismayed with the process.
Sorry. Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah. Commissioner Beatty.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. We're supposed to receive 3.8 million, we received 1.1. Are we assured of that 2.7 million that we're going to receive that? Is that assured? Or?
No, 3.8 million was a very rough estimate that our outside counsel had presented when we entered into the settlement in December 2021. As they mentioned at the time, the number of variables, whether the bankruptcy is ongoing, unknown settlement amounts, there's still cases that are settling at this time related to this. So we're not guaranteed instead what we were guaranteed was a portion of the money that the Kansas Attorney General would reach in any of these settlements. Because what happened at the national level is all these defendants, instead of negotiating with thousands of municipalities and other plaintiffs, they negotiated with the 50 attorneys general around the country. And so as Commissioner Dennis was talking about, you could opt in or opt out, but if you didn't opt in, you have the risk of being left behind. And so Sedgwick County did opt in, but we're not entitled to a specific amount, but instead we're entitled under the Kansas Fights Addiction Act to a certain portion. There's a formula at the state level based on our participation as a litigating county.
So we're not sure. I see the 3.8 million in total over 18. We're not sure if we're going to receive any more money at all, correct?
We believe we will get more money,
but we're not assured.
But we don't know how much that'll be exactly and when exactly we receive it.
So, but we do know we have the 1.1.
That's correct.
So next question was, you mentioned that anyone that is affiliated with the county, because we've received money, or is the county, since we've received money, probably couldn't apply for the grants with the state. Is that correct?
That's not,
It's an order of
yeah,
preference.
it's a preference. And there's about 8 or 10 different factors in the statute that the state board is supposed to look at when they're doling out any grants. That's one of those factors. And so it says preference is given to entities not otherwise receiving the settlement funds. It doesn't mean we're not eligible. And so I think that that's something, if the Board of County Commissioners are interested in doing it, county could still apply for those projects moving forward. And, it just means that under that factor, maybe we're slightly less preferred than non-recipients of funds.
I'm just beginning to think of like the sheriff's office or, political subdivisions in the state in that regard, if that would be considered.
It would apply, I believe, to the Sedgwick County
Sedgwick
Sheriff's
County.
Office. Yeah, I don't think, if you had entities that are completely separate, but I imagine, a good example, I don't know for sure how they would apply it to the fire district. That is a separate taxing subdivision and they aren't directly receiving any of these funds. So maybe there's an ability there for them to not have that preference count against them. I don't know exactly how this.
So.
So, thank you, Chairman. So does the state have the same two eligible expenditure options?
No, they do not. They're limited to forward-looking expenditures. So prevention, reduction, treatment, or mitigation strategies. They cannot go to cover past expenses.
And doing some simple math here, but it looks like there's, I don't know if they do the distribution based on population or how they did that exactly. Has anybody reviewed?
It is based on population. I mentioned the 12.5%, and then I believe out of all the counties that ended up participating, the ones that already were litigating, getting slightly more money than the non-litigating counties. Then it was all based on population.
Did Wichita receive some?
They did. They've received roughly the same amount of money that Sedgwick County has.
Interesting. Okay. All right, well, I think along Commissioner Beatty's point, it seems like this is not dependable funding, so we don't know how much we're gonna get, when we're gonna get it, so it seems like to set up any type of ongoing programming may be a challenge for this type of fund. I look at this as one-time expenditure opportunities, so I'll say that. All right, I'll sit back and see what else I have to say. Thank you.
And one more question and then we'll move to. Oh, yeah. Commissioner Lopez, sorry. Commissioner Lopez, you have anything? Justin, my last question is on that one of your eligible expense slides. The last bullet, you indicates Jeff Valley's cooler and so together for joint projects. Is it possible that we can pool along with the state for the joint projects? Good question.
I don't believe so. The reason I say that is this money the state has, the 75%, it can only be expended very specifically how that board provides grants. And the MOU specifically indicates municipalities. So I don't think it contemplates us in the state. That may be permissible though, if there was a program that the county came up with and would work with the state. I don't want to say it's not possible, I guess is what I would say.
Could you check into that?
Yeah, just certainly can.
Chair, would it be feasible to have the same conversation with the city? If there's an opportunity to collaborate in some of these areas?
To that question, Commissioner B, that's certainly contemplated in the MOU. And if that's something the commissioners are being consensus to do, I think county staff could work with city staff if that's something you.
I think it would be wise to at least have a conversation, see if there's opportunities.
Again, Commissioner Cruz, Lopez, my apologies. My apologies.
Can you hear me? Sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute a second ago. I don't know what that was about. And I don't know what I missed since I disconnected and reconnected, but I was just wondering if there's a way that we can work with other groups that are getting this money as well. I mean, can we do something? 1 million is great, but it's not necessarily going to change what we're trying to do here. So I didn't know what that would look like.
Commissioner Lopez, I think that if the will of the Board of County Commissioners was to work with other entities on this, I think, and let me clarify, are you talking about the 1 million we already have or any future funding from the state?
Both. I would think both.
Certainly with the 1 million we have now, if that was something the county wanted to partner with someone, whether private sector or municipality, that could be done. I believe, but the portion on the state has, that would be a grant application. So that could be done. That'd be up to the board, as to the state board, whether they would provide any of that grant funding.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. It looks like on option 2 here, we could, then, I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm saying it's the way this is worded, it looks like we could put that in general fund and use it like normal expenditure. So we don't have to do anything special with this money.
Yeah, that's correct, Commissioner Howell. The Board of County Commissioners would have to pass a resolution if that would be done. I know in the litigation, there was information submitted and compiled as to the various departments that are represented here today as to essentially the harm that the county suffered in responding to the opioid epidemic that would probably justify any of that past years. And so that can be done under the state act.
I remember that was exactly the argument we made back in the day was we've already incurred expenditures and the property taxpayers are paying this and the settlement should pay, a portion of what they've caught, the damage they've caused. And so it should be essentially property tax relief to people who are currently covering that cost. And so to me, that was the idea. I think, I know this is probably not the right time to bring this up, but it seems like there should be I've said it, I don't forget how many times now, but I've said this a lot. There needs to be a revenue stream to deal with issues of substance abuse, homelessness, and mental health. And we don't have a revenue stream dedicated to this purpose. This $1 million is a drop in the bucket for what's needed, really. So maybe this is money that should set us up for a much bigger discussion. If you were to spend this money, you spend it through this extremely quick and it'd be gone. And then I promise it'll still be here. So I don't know that this is, I view this as a huge relief to any problem we're dealing with right now. But I think if you can get this to get us to a permanent revenue stream that deals with this more comprehensively and long-term strategy, I would rather see us do that. But I understand there's going to be projects presented here that will spend through this money, and we'll see what that is. But I don't know that I like the idea of any one-time spending that's going to just solve a problem for one day and the problem returns again to us tomorrow. So, all right, thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. As we move forward and we listen to the different departments that are affected, we've got health department here, EMS, fire, emergency communication, sheriff, ComCare, environmental resources, forensic science center, corrections district court. We have an awful lot of different agencies that are affected by this. My worry is that if we go back again in time and we look at the second opioid settlement, we went out to the community and we said, what do you need? And we got $300 or $400 million worth of requests. And we found that we had a great need within the county. And I think we were embarrassed. I truly was embarrassed that we went out and asked, and everybody had expectations and we couldn't meet any of those expectations. At this point in time, I would not vote at all to go out to the community until we make sure that everything is met within our own departments, because they're critical. They've been fighting this all along. So please do not ask me to vote to ask for other agencies outside of Sedgwick County to participate in this settlement. $1 million is a drop in the bucket when we're looking at the number of departments and the size of budgets and the amount of expenses that we have for each of those departments. Thank you.
That's a great comment. And Chairman, it's worth noting also that those nonprofits will have an opportunity to go to the state and a grant process and RFP process. So I think we need to communicate that when these dollars are made available, these nonprofits will have opportunity for funding from the state. If we're looking to cure, I'm curious if we're looking to cure previous expenses or damages, what does that look like? What expenses are we curing? What do we have a list of those things? Do we have?
If there's no, let me springboard into that. If there's no other questions, answer that question. We just roll in. Well, here's where we're at with the department heads in here. When we knew we were going to have this discussion, I asked them about a week ago to think of things that they could, moving forward, could use this money for to help mitigate the essentially drug use. We had some discussion on the historical perspective that Commissioner Beatty's asked about. What would that take as far as documentation? And I don't know that we have a clean answer on that unless, I mean, we'd surely have to show some type of science to that.
Yeah. And I guess Commissioner Beatty, your question, I can see what we've got. Again, I think that in the course of litigation, there was information compiled about the expenses that we were out, which were, I think, probably dwarf the money we've received at this point. So I can look to provide that.
But I think what you're going to hear today in just a minute or two from each of these people is kind of looking forward what they could use the money for. And I do agree, as Commissioner Howe said, it probably should be viewed as one time. I think you might hear some FTE or some positional kinds of plan. And if that's true, I think the commission should consider, if we're going to spend the money that way, that we then have a plan with general fund to either keep it going or use it as a pilot program or whatever. So I think you'll hear a myriad of responses from the department heads today, and I'd like to move into that. And you guys can question them as they come. We'll just start with the boots on the ground, which is sheriff and fire and EMS first. Let's sheriff them up first, and then we'll go to fire and EMS that are actually out on the street, and then we'll go to some support services and back end services too that are impacted.
Good morning, Commissioners. Appreciate the chance to speak to you today. As you know, we have, along with Sedgwick County Communications and other partners, have really started to try to educate on the fentanyl issues here in this county, and it is taking over the drug trade here in Wichita, Sedgwick County. And so our goal is the education of youth. A lot we get people ask us, why aren't we educating, folks on Broadway and those type of things? It becomes way too non-manageable. And the fact of the matter is that, in my opinion and other people's opinion is if we're going to start seeing a decline in drug use and specifically fentanyl use, we got to start with our youth. We got to educate them on the dangers of drug use, and especially when it comes to fentanyl, because it's killing our youth. And so one of the things that, I've thought of here is because we're trying to get the message out mainly to the kids. It's somewhat difficult. Sitting in a meeting yesterday, we're what's called geofencing. And we're looking at, along with the Wichita Police Department, geofencing around our middle schools and around our high schools. So when they're on their phones, it hits them with different ads or different type of educational materials when it comes to fentanyl, and different links and those type of things that they can go to along with the parents to get more educated. So I would say, one of the things for the sheriff's office and law enforcement in general is the education piece, because we've got to do a better job of educating our youth. Secondly, and this goes more into what we've talked about in the years past. As you know, we are still in the planning stages of the cameras that are supposed to go on the north side to replace deputy positions. It's about 24 deputy positions that would be replaced. Looking at possibly taking a couple of those positions and hiring social workers, which would be at a lesser rate than what our deputies are paid, solely for them to be able to connect people to services when they're released from here. So folks that are addicted to drugs, they dry out in jail, but they come right back, because as soon as they get out, it takes quite a while for folks to get into rehab, such as SAC and stuff. It's about a 3-month wait, those type of things. And looking how we can at least center on that population that seems to be a transient population in the jail and out of the jail, on getting them into services a lot quicker than us just releasing them out the front door and giving them some information to say, hey, if you want these services, here they are. Whereas if you have social workers that are making the phone calls ahead of time, seeing if there's bed space at different areas, getting into homeless shelters, and seeing if we can decline our jail population in that manner. So those are just two ideas that we've discussed at the office. I've discussed with the police department, those type of things.
Great ideas, Sheriff. Very good. Any questions for Sheriff?
Okay. Just one thing, I know the sheriff's a member of the crime commission. We just got an email yesterday from the crime commission that we probably ought to get the word out. And I don't know who PCCA is. Do you know?
DECA.
anyway.
I don't remember
Providing
the
free-
Department of, I don't know.
They're providing free Narcan, nasal spray, and training to anyone in any community organization here that's a Kansas resident. So I can send this over to the manager and they can get the word out, but you can have free group training or individual self-training module for people that want to learn more about Narcan, and they can get Narcan for free. So
That's actually who we're getting our Narcan from, because they provide the training as well to the deputies. So it's children and families is what they deal with. DECA does.
But personally, I like your first part of your conversation about educating the youth, stopping it early. Talked about it before, but maybe this is a tool. We'll hear everything from everybody, but thank you. And Commissioner Lopez, do you have any questions for sure?
Just one, if we look at doing one thing or the other, I mean, do you have a price associated with what those would end up costing? Is there going to be long-term expenses? Is it going to be one-time expenses? I mean, have you put some of that to paper yet, just so we have a better idea of what that might entail?
So the meeting was yesterday, and the lady at the media group that we're looking at doing this is supposed to send me today what that pricing would look like for a year around the school systems. Now, granted, there will be a couple months that we wouldn't be doing it because we're out of school. And so I have a better idea today on what that would look like from a school standpoint. There's a lot of schools here. So, you know, I just throw that out because it seems like a really good idea on how to get the information to the kids compared to the way we're doing it right now. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, that we couldn't scale that back, those type of things, but, you know, it's a bigger conversation to take a look at.
And I wonder if the school systems, if the superintendents would be interested in partnering with us in any way with that as well. So that might be something to keep in mind going forward to see if they would be helpful with
Yes,
that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
The social worker, that's incremental to what you currently do now, on top of the social workers that are already in the jail.
We don't have any social.
Okay, so this would be a new service that you're standing up in the jail.
Currently right now, if, you know, folks that are abusers of drugs want to try to get with SAC, we'll help facilitate with SAC to come in, do an assessment, those type of things. But literally, you know, when people are being released, here's your property and please don't come back. We don't have the manpower, the time, anything else to do that kind of work that a social worker could.
So sure, we can make a case that both are pretty detrimentally important to the operations of what you do at the jail, correct?
Yeah.
So these things here, the fentanyl education and.
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, you're not hearing me get up and say, oh, we need to do more interdiction. We've been fighting the war on drugs since 1985 and we're not winning and we're not going to win. And so we've got to look at this in a different realm. And that realm is through trying to figure out how we can get more services in this community. And then also the education piece and connecting people with those services. Now, you're going to have people that make really poor choices. They're going to continue making poor choices. But there is some folks out there that want a way out. And it's hard for that to happen right now.
Sure. While Fire's coming to the podium, thanks, Sheriff. I might just add, we'll take these comments and we'll formalize this into a spreadsheet and put as best as we can costs attached to it. And we'll provide that for commissioners. And I think you'll find that the drop in the bucket comment on the thing is accurate after you hear what these guys all have done. Go ahead, sir. Kevin, you're on that.
Morning, Commissioner Jonathan Halley, the medical officer for the fire district. So you're going to hear us. Our proposal is going to be very similar to what the sheriff is talking about. We would like to see a opioid intervention program within the fire district, focusing on education, opioid surveillance, so we can identify any hotspots that come up with overdoses. We would also like to see some intervention training, just as the sheriff was speaking to, with acutely intervening with Narcan for some of our businesses and school districts within the fire district. And then facilitation of existing treatment options, getting our people that are citizens within the fire district to those treatment options that exist, that often exist within the city of Wichita, or not so much in the outlying areas. So the major ask of this would be 1 FTE full-time. We do not intend to reinvent the wheel. We would like to use this FTE to coordinate with programs that are already existing, much like the ones that the sheriff was speaking to, other programs that are already existing through health. And I will stand for any questions. I don't want to go on too long, but that's kind of the major idea that we've got.
Thank you. It's nice to hear you echoing that and kind of laser focused on what you all think. I'm sure you probably had multiple ideas, but this is important, most important. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think we would like to just make sure that the member communities within the fire district receive some of these services. And we are uniquely positioned.
And we think that in a big picture, would you cooperate with Wichita Fire and Derby Fire? That you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Those relationships already exist. We've done this on other programs. We've learned a lot through COVID on these programs, and we can use that.
Commissioner Lopez? Thoughts?
Sorry. I don't know why I'm having issues with this mute button today. No, I don't have any questions right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you. And the FTE, do you have, like the sheriff has a way of balancing that off by using the positions that he has on the books now? Or do you have a way of balancing that FTE off? Because we're looking at one-time money, and I'm not going to try and add things to a fund.
Yeah, I understand. We haven't had those discussions yet. I know there is a half-time FTE available. Whether we use that to balance some of that up, I'll let the fire chief kind of speak to that.
Okay, thank you.
I think if that's the will of the commission, that if there is an FTE, that there has to be a position to slot into that, I think we make that part of the plan. Chief Lemon.
Morning, Commissioners. Kevin Lannery, EMS Chief. I think we would all like to do a lot more of the education and prevention, especially without adding FTEs and things like that to EMS. It would be difficult to do that. Our focus would be more on the patients we're running that are in crisis or overdose. And there's a lot of information on our dashboard about Narcan usage and patients. It's just interesting. 2019, we ran 335 patients given Narcan. In 2022, we ran 886. 2021 ran 923. So it's almost 3 times what it was even just since 2019. So with that, there's of course increase call volume, increase expense in commodities, medications, not knowing how large of a portion of those dollars would be available. Narcan, we gave out last year 1,300 doses of Narcan. So that all increases our commodities, things like that. Bigger items that we utilize in resuscitation of opioid overdoses or other commodities like bag valve masks, airway equipment, some bigger items that we don't currently have. We'd like to have. It's kind of standard of care on every EMS ambulance now is a ventilator. And those are some of the asks that we've asked through some CARES and ARPA money that we would like to see, but those are larger items that like I said, will be difficult to get. So that's kind of what we thought of with our response to that. So
Did you say your numbers went down last year by a little bit?
just slightly, 923 to 886. like I said,
Do you ever track success rate of the administration of Narcan, Roxalone?
We don't have specific, I mean, we have on our dashboard has cardiac arrest. So if they're in cardiac arrest, those same rates are out there. I don't believe it's broken down into types of cardiac arrest.
One of my questions, I guess I'm hearing now that the xylazine, that the drugs cut with xylazine is actually not responsive to Narcan. And the projection now is that may actually become one of the more prominent drugs of the community. So I don't know if the Narcan answer is really the answer to that. That's where this is headed. That's really not an answer.
Yeah.
Over in Dr. Brinker up and be.
Yeah, he can talk to he had some
So
information.
if someone doesn't survive that, I like to know what did they ingest that caused that death. But okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quickly, you gave some actually startling stats on how many times you're using Narcan, but you're only one of the agencies that we have that's using Narcan right now. So could we get to find out how often the sheriff and fire has administered Narcan so we can get a complete picture of how many times this gets used?
I might ask, if that's documented in the patient care report prior to our arrival, is that okay? If it's given prior to our arrival, it should be documented in patient care, or whether it's given by police, sheriff, fire.
Just technical question, if WPD gives Narcan to a patient and you guys respond, you then capture that somehow that that's been administered.
Yeah.
We should be.
And we capture the police fire also, because they're now carrying it.
Yeah, whoever is giving that prior to our arrival in our patient care report that goes to that should be captured.
They would never administer Narcan without EMS coming, right?
Who's that?
Any WPD or sheriff.
It shouldn't be.
They do.
They do. Oh, I think they're a thing. But that might, we'll have to dig into that.
Just another side comment here, but you guys are understaffed to the point you only have time for an education program. I mean, it seems like you are.
That's why I said I would love to
Yeah.
do more of the education and prevention type. Unfortunately, we don't have the staff to do that right
Yeah, whether it happens from EMS or from fire or from
now.
sheriff, as long as
That's the important
someone's
part.
kind of got the point, it doesn't, I don't have to repeat it from different agencies necessarily, but okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez? Anything?
Nope, not on my end. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll roll now to criminal justice system support function. Dr. Stedman, Steve Stonehouse for corrections, and then Dr. Burke.
Good morning, Dr. Shelley Stedman from the Regional Forensic Science Center, and I provided you some colorful pictures today. I'm sorry, Commissioner Lopez, I wasn't able to share this with you, but these are not new metrics. I know everybody's familiar with these metrics. 30% increase in autopsies, 114% increase in overdoses. You're going from 20% of those overdoses involving fentanyl to 54% of them involving fentanyl. My point isn't that we have a crisis. My point is that pretty much every program or project that you're going to consider to fund relies on this data. Every town hall calls me before the town hall, whether it's the sheriff's office, WPD, and they want these metrics because this is how we're tracking what's going on. These metrics come from one instrument in the toxicology lab that's called a liquid chromatography mass spec. And that's the instrument that is able to quantitate drugs, drug metabolites, drug precursors in blood and other biologicals. It's also the instrument that is used to analyze blood from impaired drivers. We tend to forget that we have a lot of hazards on the road with fatal amounts of fentanyl in their system because of their tolerance level driving around on the streets today. So this isn't just about postmortem analysis, it's about human performance testing as well. So I've heard commissioners ask when they fund programs, what's the progress? And whether it has to do with suicide or traffics or drug-related problems, it always falls back on the Regional Forensic Science Center to provide that data. I heard an interest in collaborating with Wichita Police Department. I think that they would support us in our efforts to replace our instrument that is going to go into obsolescence in 2024. The vast majority of the cases we work come from the Wichita Police Department. We've talked about where there are hotspots. It's our data that we're pushing out of where these overdoses occurred, where those bodies are being picked up. So we're tracking that. And when it comes to this instrumentation, I want to give you some background. In 2019, we acquired several instruments that were refurbished. And that was to bring us into the liquid chromatography age. And we have been operating with those now for about 5 years. A refurbished instrument is sort of like a salvage vehicle, a 12-year-old crash that you get parts from all over the place and you make it functional, and it's good to get your kid through college. Then there's used instrumentation, which is you drive a car for 3 years and then you decide you're going to buy it. That's a big difference between a refurbished. And then there's a new instrument. And what I would be most interested in replacing our failing instrumentation with is a used or a new instrument that's going to give us 10 to 20 years of mileage instead of 5 more years and being back into the same predicament. So why did that happen? Well, there's limitations what we can spend grant money on. These instruments are expensive and there's not a lot of grants that are able to cover the cost of this instrument. And quite frankly, I refer to it as BS because it was before Shelley. And we can't do anything about that. We can move forward and try to prepare our laboratory to be functional for the next decade. So this isn't a new idea. This has been in budget scenarios for the last 5 years. I talked about this during budget last year. We prioritized other critical needs. I was here talking about this when we had ARPA funding. NHTSA is tired of me. KDOT is tired of me. KDHE is tired of me. And the ATF is probably about to get tired of me because I heard they have some money. So I've tried every avenue that I can to replace this instrument. We have replaced one with our competitive grant. It's being validated right now. But this other one is not going to be functional after 2024. So if you want to keep having this data and you want to stay in the business of postmortem toxicology and human performance testing, this is critical. And if you're not tired of me yet, I'm going to be back for budget for next year with the same request if we're not able to use this money. The cost of a new instrument today is $315,000. A used one is $286,000. That's a quote that it's a pretty new quote. It's not that I came more prepared. It's just that I've been working on this for so long that I have that handy, and I'm be happy to present finance options. But I think if you're looking for a one-time expenditure, it would be better to buy it up front rather than obligating general funds for the next 2 years to make finance payments. So any questions?
Shelley, on behalf of the commission, I don't think we're tired here.
Oh, well, I've been asking for this one, the same thing. I mean, we saw this coming, and it's just the grant money isn't there. Money isn't there.
Well, that's a great, what you presented is very, very helpful to know. If this was approved, would you come back to us and say, now you've got supply chain problems that will get it for 4 years?
Well, we amazingly, so the thing about a used instrument is those are instruments that these companies use for demonstrations and training and education. So they become available. So there could be a slight wait period for that. They've told me they've never had an issue with getting one. So we just received one last year. The timeline for purchasing that, thank you to everybody in this room who helped, was amazing. And there's a lot of reasons because we want redundancy in our lab with this single source exception. We're able to fall back on in compliance with our purchasing. That becomes a lot harder also with the federal funds. Things are less possible. So I don't think so. We certainly didn't experience that last year.
Questions? Commissioner Dennis?
Is one enough or do you need more than?
Well, we have three and we replaced one, and we believe that these two instruments together, because they're newer and their capabilities are now expanded and different, that will be able to provide the methods of testing that we need in our lab. So we're not trying to be stingy. We're trying to stay in business.
Well, I haven't heard all the presentations so far, but between the social worker and sheriff, which I think is a good idea to keep people back out of trouble. And these are my top two so far.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lopez, any questions, comments?
I don't have any questions, but I do agree with Commissioner Dennis that this has to be a top priority going in, regardless of if that's with this money or with budget. I know you said you're going to come back and speak at the budget retreat here soon, but this definitely has to be a priority going into anything we're doing around this topic. Thank you.
David, thank you. Thanks for all you do for knowledge. Our area.
Stonehouse coming up. I might just add that Shelley does so much work on behalf of the state of Kansas that on a partnership kind of thing. That's KDR. I think this is right for trying to get into some of that state money to help support her.
Remind us again, how many counties do you support? Does this office support?
We serve the contiguous districts. So one district can be 3 counties. For example, Sumner County is in a district with 2 other counties. We generally look at the number of counties we serve, which is, I believe, about a couple of dozen. Every now and then, there'll be a case from county clear out west that was live watched here, becomes our case.
Yes.
But we do serve, we are the only postmortem tox laboratory in the state. We get calls all the time from other counties that want us to do their human performance testing on their impaired drivers, because nobody else in the state provides that. And those counties can't charge those cases without knowing the drug levels. They're having to use private laboratories. So we could catch up. Our goal right now is to be a service to Sedgwick County, and we do not provide those services out of county when we have a backlog. So.
Thank you for clarifying. So,
Morning Chairman, Commissioner Steve Stonehouse from the Corrections Department. Our needs are basically in the areas of testing, education, and treatment. In adult services, we already operate a drug court, and we need additional testing to be in compliance with National Drug Court standards. We're getting ready to stand up a Veterans Treatment Court. The initial phase of folks will be served by the VA, but as we expand that, we'll need treatment for those people. So that will be an expansion beyond what VA currently is able to serve folks with their benefits. So that could mean ComCare providing the treatment, another provider, or the VA at a fee for us. And also for all of our adult clients, we need sober living unit, place for them to live to practice being sober. Everything that I'm going to talk about isn't necessarily things that I want an FTE for, but a contract or services to pay for access for our clients. Things like medication assisted treatment, additional sober living beds, additional capacity for substance abuse testing. That's nobody's favorite task as an officer, is to get 50 UAs a day. So maybe looking at a contract to have a lab doing that for us. So we're not in that business, but doing it at a level that it makes sense to prevent folks from using and addressing it when somebody is dirty. In the juvenile system, we need treatment beds because none exist in this entire region. There is Mirror Incorporated here in Wichita is going to be serving 16 and 17-year-olds. The juvenile system starts at 10 and goes until 23. So we have no beds. We send folks to Johnson County. It's probably the least effective way to do substance abuse treatment for somebody, is to send them away and no family participation. I wouldn't propose that definitely, would not like to operate a substance abuse facility, but if we could support the stand up of one, I think that would be helpful. There typically are funds for treatment for folks, but the startup costs probably
would be significant for a provider to serve juveniles because it's very expensive. So that's something that we need. And we also need additional testing capabilities and monitoring capabilities for juvenile offenders, as the majority of them are living in the community. And also education for our staff, an adult and juvenile system. Commissioner Howell talked a little bit about new drugs. That's something that we always need to be aware of, what we're looking for, how to monitor them. So ongoing continuing education and stuff is important as well. So those are the three areas that we would need in corrections.
Commissioner Beatty, appreciate those comments. Thank you, Chairman. Can you quantify the need for juvenile beds? How many substance abuse beds that we're outsourcing to Johnson County? How many juveniles are we talking about?
So in Johnson County, we compete with 104 counties. So we probably send one a week that have been waiting a number of months to go. So I think a smart option would be South Central Kansas, look at something cooperatively in this area to do it. I'm sure the need is not more than 10 beds. But it's hard to prove a negative. It's hard to prove who doesn't go because there's no bed. I know we have kids that don't go because there's no bed.
I'd like to point out that this is, again, juvenile corrections, and there's a $60 million fund that could fund that as well. And, we're gonna work that bill tomorrow. I'd like to just point out that may be the best source of funding, because that'd be not just dropping the bucket one-time funding, but it's gonna be long-term funding from the state, which I think is a more appropriate source of funding. I agree that the beds are needed.
You're testifying.
Well, they're working to go tomorrow. I already did testify, and so I'll be monitoring that. I expect they will, I am very sure they will pass that bill out of the House. So we'll have to see how we can push it forward like just the Senate.
More questions or comments, Commissioner Lopez?
No, not on my end. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Steve. Good information.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Brinker with the Medical Director's Office. So I guess I'll start and go with needs first, or then I can answer any questions you have about Narcan or just implementation in the field and that sort of thing. So with OMD, our needs are pretty basic. I think we utilize more funding for simulation mannequins, primarily with this particular topic with airway and treatment modalities for that. We could even expand OMD a bit further so we can also supply training and our expertise for regional areas that may be underserved and need that assistance. I'd also like to see us set aside some money for a Narcan voucher program. I've been working with Ascension via Christie for those patients that we run through EMS or fire that we give Narcan to. They respond to that medication and they wake up and then they refuse treatment. So it gives them a backup. So if they go home and relapse, they would have the opportunity to have picked up that medication. The pitfall with that is usually one, either availability of the med. In Ascension's case, the funding issue is always there as well. And that can also be extrapolated to the Safe Streets Wichita program, which is, I believe it's still in existence, to help them with their needs as well. But they also need to probably take that a step further and also have maybe the possibility for some funding for safe disposal of paraphernalia and that sort of thing. Because we've had reports of, several fields with multiple sharps and needles that are just been disposed and thrown away. I think fentanyl test strips should be readily available as a prevention tool more than anything. So people that can, unfortunately, they're using controlled substances and that sort of thing, they can at least have the opportunity to test to see if there is fentanyl involved. I'd also foresee maybe an echoing Director Stonehouse is, I think education's a key to this as well, but also intervention as well. At some point, I'd like to see us maybe set aside money to expand mobile integrated health to include Suboxone, so that we can do an induction in the field if the person makes meets certain criteria. You know, opiate withdrawal scale greater than 8. If they're moderate to heavy user, that sort of thing, we could induct them in the field with medication to, if we respond, they respond to Narcan, we can start an induction with Suboxone to alleviate their withdrawal symptoms several hours afterwards. And it's very difficult to overdose on Suboxone. But that's also going to require an extended commitment from the county to do that, and likely would involve another FTE and a support vehicle for that as well. And then with staffing levels, with EMS would have to be adequately staffed to do that sort of thing as well. With that being said, we would also have to develop a robust system or at least places for these people to go. We could induce them with Suboxone, provide them with a voucher and follow up for maybe 30 days worth of medication so we can get them into an opioid treatment program. I would assume ComCare would be a big factor for that, and some of the local providers in the area. But that system would have to be developed, and like I said, it would be a continued commitment, not just $1 million. I think the sheriff is right. I think education is the key, and I think OMD can also be a big factor with that as well, and training or going out to a lot of the area schools, even high schools, and help them through that process. But again, that may require expansion from OMD for another FTE and a support vehicle. And I think also that way Chief, in response to Chief Landerman in his proposals, I think ventilators are a must. They're about $7,000 a piece. I could be wrong on that premise, but and I think a robust allocation of funds for all the system partners for replacement equipment, monitors, ventilation supplies, glides, scopes, that sort of thing would be a need as well. So that's kind of the bulk of what I had here. As far as the utilization of Narcan in the field, I also serve as the medical director for most, if not all, of the police law enforcement departments in the county. All of them basically initiated a Narcan response with 4 milligrams of the nasal Narcan per state statute. DCCA kind of initiated the response with Wichita PD. And I do receive, each time they give that medication, I receive a report from them with basic information about the patient, how they found the patient, response to Narcan, which medic unit, and did they survive. Unfortunately, I did not compile those figures to see, but I would say they've been a success. They've had a lot of saves out there, but unfortunately, they also run across quite a few that are beyond resuscitation. They've just been down too long and they don't respond to medication.
Okay, you said at the beginning, the simulation management, how much is it?
Well, it depends on, we just submitted a proposal with the budget process. They average anywhere from $7,000 to $14,000 for just depending on where you go. We've been looking at more of the iSimulate program that's going to kind of core along with what EMS is using with iPads and that sort of thing. They vary in price range. Now, if you do the full size simulation, we commonly refer to him as Hal, who is working towards the end of his life expectancy. We've added additional support, maintenance and support. So we'll get a few more years out of him. They can range anywhere from, $150,000 to $200,000.
You said Hal, not Howell, correct?
No, I said Hal, H-A-L.
I heard what you said.
So, but we can get you numbers for that. I don't have that number to talk to you. Sure. And then I think you had a question about Xylazine.
Yeah, xylazine, I'm hearing now since 2021, it's again, these drug things just continue to evolve and morph into the next most dangerous thing. So now xylazine is they're cutting the fentanyl with that. And I don't know with that, how that's getting into other drugs, who knows? But I understand if there's xylazine mixed into this, that the Narcan does not respond.
It does not. There's not a known antidote or something other than probably hemodialysis it's an animal train. It's used for animals.
But I also understand that's becoming more prevalent.
They're cutting fentanyl with it. Yeah.
So I guess my point is, I'm not sure that the knocks alone, I think education, let me just say this. I think for someone who doesn't know what's going on, education is eye-opening to them and they change their choices.
Sure.
I think that's very effective. If they already know about this and you tell them what they already know, I don't know how effective that is. So we almost ought to just thoughtfully find out how many people are we trying to educate that basically have already heard, they already know. Just reminding them what they've already heard. If that's the type of audience we have, it may not be very effective. I think at the end of the day, some people get caught up into this because they just don't know.
Sure.
They don't realize the risk. Many of them do know the risks. They make choices, which gets into the issue of fentanyl test strips. I'm really on the fence on this one. First of all, let me just point out, they're not legal from the state of Kansas right now. They may change that. But for us to hand those out, I think is legally interesting. I don't know whether we should get involved in that right now or not until the state changes the law. Second of all, I think maybe it sends the wrong message that you can dabble in this stuff and you can do it safely. And I'm not sure that's the right message either. The young man that died in Derby, one thing that I took away from that whole discussion was it was not an homogeneous drug. He took one half of the pill and he was fine. Took the other half of the pill and it killed him.
Right.
So that just tells you that the cutting of fentanyl into other drugs may not be homogeneous. So you can test a portion of what you have.
Right.
Does not tell you with certainty that the rest of it's safe. And if someone starts testing the drug that's got xylazine in it, is it going to protect them? I think that the idea that fentanyl test strips are going to keep people safe as they make choices to dabble in illegal drugs, I'm not sure that's the message I want to send out there. So I'm conflated. I'm very much on the fence on this one, whether we want to be spending money to mitigate this or strategically mitigate this using fentanyl test strips. But I think we ought to know more about the how effective is this, and for people who are really addicted to these drugs, they may not want to take time to test anything anyway, and because they're addicted. And people who are just getting into this, maybe they're very thoughtful and they're very careful, and they would take the time to use a fentanyl test strip, maybe with the wrong conclusion, telling them they can safely do this. That may not be the right answer. So I'm not sure that's the right. I don't know how much I feel like this is the right answer. And I think we ought to do some kind of a study. I heard almost everybody say education, education, education. But do we know how many people out there don't know? What's our audience really? I mean, obviously, I think younger children, they're learning this for the first time. For the adults, I think a lot of the adults already know, and they're still making choices to do this. So I'd like to know through some type of study, what is our true audience that's going to respond to education?
I think it's worth noting too that many people that are suffering from substance abuse addiction, at some point in their addiction, this doesn't become a choice anymore. Right. There's a physical dependency. So any sort of education without wraparound services that can help get people remove the addictive portion of what they're struggling with, it's really a shot in the dark, frankly, in my opinion.
We would have to put money. We'd have to pump money into, if Compare wants to establish an addiction program, or some of the area providers, that are able to work into that. I think you're also going to see a lot of the primary care physicians tapping into this market as well, because they lift the DEA waiver requirement for prescribing Suboxone. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that after.
Appreciate that, doctor. I think it needs to happen, but I think the general awareness and education of our community needs to have a basic understanding that there comes a point in someone that's addicted to these substances where this isn't a choice anymore.
Right.
Am I correct in? that
Yeah,
that's a physical-
they're heavily addicted.
Correct, yes. So the education is in hopes of educating those recreational drug users that are trying other drugs to, when you talk about fentanyl strips or things of this sort.
Or if we can direct them to a treatment program.
So wraparound
The
service.
fentanyl strips statistically show that they are effective. I think the last one I read was like 43%. There's been a 43% success rate in curbing some of these overdoses, because you get first timers that are being told maybe this is something else. Maybe it's benzodiazepine such as Xanax, or they're, who knows what they're getting. And they have been shown that if they do the test on it, they find out it's fentanyl and step away from it. So there is some statistical proof that these test strips are effective. It's just a matter of how far we want to go with this.
One other thing, I'd like to talk to someone at the Kansas Department of Education, the Kansas State School Board, and even some local school boards to find out to what extent our professional educators are they putting this program, this education into their normal programming? Because they've got the most captive audience, they're professional educators, and it just seems like rather than having someone come into the school for an hour and talk about this for an hour, and then that's good for a year. I think professional educators ought to make this part of their curriculum, that they are talking about the risks of illegal drugs, and that should be something that the school system is engaging in. And if they're doing it, then we can trust them to do that. I think maybe our audience ought to be separate from the schools, for example. But I just want to have a good baseline, understanding exactly who's doing what. I'm not sure anybody really knows what extent there's groups of people out there that are pecking at this thing, but we have no comprehensive understanding exactly what's all going on in terms of education.
Commissioner Lopez, you have anything?
I think everything I had's already been discussed, so nothing new. Thank you.
We'll finish this discussion up then, but then to hear from the health department and ComCare, which can cover that, so that will. Yeah.
Good morning, commissioners. Adrian Byrne, Sedgwick County Health Department Director. So you've already heard about education, and we definitely support that. Families, schools, the community in general. I think a lot of our community have no idea what is going on in regards to fentanyl and opioids. And when I went to the town hall that the sheriff and the coalition had maybe last month, I've just been getting out of the fog of COVID in the last several months. I had no idea, because in 19, methamphetamine was still the main drug, and that is no more. And I thought, if I'm not aware, even though, again, stuck in that vortex of COVID, that I had people around me that had no idea about the number of fentanyl deaths. And when we think about educating youth, that they need to know that they can't buy anything off the streets, because anything that is being made, could be made in the same building as fentanyl. And so they're finding that even non-drugs like Ritalin could have fentanyl on it and could have dire effects, because that's not a drug that youth are involved in. So if all of us work together with prevention and just education, it really has felt good just to hear all the different departments that know how important that is. And it takes more than one or two people, one or two departments to be able to hit all the community that we need to hit. And we, would be in the middle schools with an educator, be in the middle schools with a high school, in the high school. I don't believe the schools have the capacity. We're going in and doing some education around vaping and use. They don't have the capacity. So I'd be surprised if there was any education going on in regards to opioids. And then the other thing is a data repository. Just like you heard with the Narcan, there are pockets of data all over the community. And we don't even know totally where all those are. Some of them, we do know nonprofits that don't really have the resources to do anything with that data. So if we had some sort of data repository, and maybe, Mike and Chris could help us with that we would help our partners, even if it's to have an Excel sheet that they dump into this data repository. It gives us more of an idea of what we have going on in the community, because we have ideas, but we don't have an idea in totality what is going on. And then that helps with being targeted interventions as well.
Okay. Questions, comments, very good.
I think we should talk to the schools and find out what they are doing.
Well,
I think we should start with the Department of Education at the state level all the way down. I think we should not assume what we think they're doing, they're not doing. Let's find out.
I will get that.
And I would tell you, again, I think vaping is, it's certainly a concern in the schools. They spend a lot of time on vaping. But vaping won't kill these children the way the fentanyl will. So the level of seriousness on this drug is infinitely higher.
Oh, yes.
Commissioner Lopez, comments?
No, not on my end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Morning, Chairman, Commissioners. I'll cover a little bit for Joan, and then I've got some other thoughts as well. So from a ComCare perspective, as you've heard many times, naloxone would be helpful for our staff to have available, so that as they work with their patient populations, they would be able to intercede if necessary. Support for medication-assisted therapies. Dr. Green talked a little bit about this, Foxen, with treatment options that are related. By far, the most effective addiction treatment tool for opioid addiction is medication-assisted treatment. ComCare's got a couple of providers that have been trained in the past, and so that things are loosening up now. There'll be more prescribers that will be able to prescribe that treatment modality, but it's expensive. It's a very expensive drug to make available. Many of the folks that we treat at ComCare are uninsured or underinsured, and so financial support for medication-assisted treatment at ComCare and with other providers in the community would be a big benefit. If we could also provide some additional support to individuals that are going through that treatment. And it sounds like all the discussion that we've had, we talked a little bit about education, the benefits of education, and one of the things that we could use, maybe in the short term for a few years, is a prevention specialist that would work between ComCare, Health, EMS, the sheriff, have one staff person that was working on prevention efforts to make sure that we were hitting on those education spots that we need to. When I think about this topic, I think you, as a body, have a couple of decision points to make. One is the future past question. Do we take some of these resources and apply them to what we've spent money on in the past, or do we look towards the future and treatment? And then after that decision's made, I think you have to make a decision about, are we going to fund prevention or intervention? I think we should spend both, but it would be helpful if we had some kind of a ratio that you recommended to us, that we apply, 35% to prevention and 65% to intervention, or reverse those. But from a prevention program, I think some of the things that we've talked about, education is key, as we've all talked about. But there's a population that we haven't talked much about educating. That is prescribers. And so if we were to be able to fund some education for physicians that are prescribing opioids and make sure that they knew the safest way to prescribe those, so that there were fewer addiction results from a broken arm or a knee surgery, that sort of thing. That's one population that we haven't talked about educating yet, but I think it's an important population. Lots of different education prevention opportunities with youth, with adults, with parents, that sort of thing, making Narcan available through public safety, public health, and social service organizations in the community. Important. And then from an intervention perspective, or treatment perspective, medication assisted treatment, again, that's the key to opioid treatment. Again, educating physicians about how and when to refer their patients to that MAT. Dr. Brinker mentioned that now primary care docs may be able to prescribe that. Some of them probably aren't going to be comfortable with that. It would be helpful for us to maybe work with the med school to offer some training to physicians in the community. When's the right time to refer someone to MAT? Again, ComCare's got MAT providers. There's not lots. There are other organizations in the community that have MAT providers again. But I think the biggest issue is if I'm a primary care doc and I've got a patient that's talking about this issue, when do I refer them to that MAT treatment? And then if we could provide some additional wraparound support for those folks that are going through that medication assisted treatment, whether it be peer counselors, peer support, case management, I think all of those things are going to have an impact on the success of that treatment. And lastly, I'd like to compliment Adrian. She's been talking to the city of Wichita about wastewater surveillance, because we would be able to work with the city of Wichita to do some wastewater surveillance and help us figure out what kind of targeted, which parts of the community we need to focus our efforts on. So I think that's another good use of some of this.
A couple questions and then a comment. Thank you, Chairman. Who or how many or who's doing a medical detox in this community for people that don't have insurance? Is there a way to get me a list of who's doing?
Well, I can get you a list.
Not many people.
No.
Not many organizations are doing medical detoxes for people without insurance, correct?
No. There's one of the things that we'd like to do is we expand the community crisis centers. We've got space built in
To do some medical detox.
detox.
Second question is, and I don't know, maybe someone can give me these statistics, but what is the success rate for someone coming off an opiate addiction without a medical detox moving into a position of recovery? I don't know if anybody has that data available that can give me that data. It seems to me, and again, I'm the rookie in the room, but it seems to me that without a medical detox, people coming from opiate addiction, it's a pretty low success rate that they're going to get sustained recovery. It's just an assumption, but I'd like to see some data to verify that. And I think just an observation, in the context of this conversation, we're talking about $1.1 million. This isn't a big sum of money. Some of the things that we're discussing are going to take significant more resources and wraparound services than this. I think all of these ideas are wonderful ideas and they're necessary, but we're only talking about $1 million right now. And some of these things to move us in the direction in this community to get sustained health, it's going to cost significant more than $1 million and significant more reform and some of the things that we need to do. So I'm really interested in seeing how we can cure some of the things that the damages that took place and get things set in place so that we can look at preventative. But the preventative conversation, the second part of this that Justin mentioned earlier, is a significantly more complex conversation than just $1 million. I don't think this is by any stretch of the imagination of waste of time or resources. But we're only talking about $1 million. I think this community needs to have a broader conversation on how we do some of the things that are happening in this community, some of these conversations. We need to have a broader conversation about how we accomplish some of those things. And I'm in agreement with Commissioner Howe that any incremental services that we're going to provide is going to require an incremental source of revenue. Said it a few times, kind of to a few people, but a few years back, we did a 1 cent sales tax to fund an entertainment venue in this community arena. I think these conversations need to happen on a big. I think we need to be honest with our community. That the things that we want to accomplish and they expect us to accomplish in mental health, substance abuse, and homelessness are not going to happen with current budgets. They're simply not going to happen. I know that's not a fun conversation or a popular conversation, but I think it's a conversation, observation to this, the discussions we've had. It's a conversation we're going to have. These are all wonderful ideas, but we're dealing with a pot of $1 million, and $1 million isn't going to do it here. It's not going to do it what we need to do. And unfortunately, my fear is, and then I'll stop, but my fear is it will just kind of pick at it a little bit and maybe waste a little bit of money instead of do some things that can really transform the health of this community. So that's what I'll be advocating for, and I think it needs to have a really broad conversation on how to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Well, first, I appreciate the discussion that we had today from everyone. it's a huge issue, but the nice thing about it, we're not working all by ourselves in this. There are a lot of different agencies that are also tackling this at the same time. We need to continue to coordinate with those. The Mental Health Substance Abuse Coalition, we put on the recent town hall meeting over at the Extension Center. We saw how many people were involved just as we went into that discussion at the Extension Center. So we've got the Crime Commission that's deeply involved in education, and back on the Mental Health Substance Abuse Coalition, Terry Moses is a member of that. So she has USD 259 engaged, and I believe other school districts are engaged in this. We need to, as we work forward in this, the commission and all of our staff that is engaged in other community programs, so we need to stay engaged in those so that we can see what we can do. Because I heard over and over again, education is one of the top things that we need to get across. And I know that's one of the things that the Crime Commission is working very hard on. I don't want people to be discouraged coming out here saying we only have $1 million. We have a lot of different agencies that are working with us outside of Sedgwick County that are trying to help resolve this issue. So continue to work with those folks, and I appreciate it.
I just have, it may not be for Tim, but maybe it is, I don't know, but I'm looking at this data that forensic presenter gave to us, Dr. Sedman. There's a 31% reduction between 21 and 22. Can someone please explain to me what happened? That's a huge difference in data. It changes the trajectory. Trajectory was up, and also it goes down. And it's a big down. So I'm curious what caused that to happen.
Those cases are 2022 deaths, and so there's still about 350 reports pending. So you're only seeing a portion. We don't have results on those yet. Unfortunately, with overdoses, we have to wait for the tox. And so it's February, tox takes 4 to 6 months. So that's because you don't have the whole picture for that year. Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Lopez?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Becky. Observation is
We'll compile this,
Yeah.
get a report back to the commission, prices on best and some costs. Appreciate it.
made me think in turn. Options would be what Tim pointed out. Maybe a smaller percentage of help and pay for something in the past, but focus on the future. Is my thought, that I'm open to whatever. We've lived with what we've lived with. We gotta move forward, in my opinion. But can we, let's take a quick break and then we can come back for the building. So, time's moving along. Let's get back, right? Let's start before, let's take 10 minutes. So we'll start before then. Good call.
Yeah.
You're ready, Charles. Okay, we are reconvening. No, but it's right after. All right, Tom. Tanya's going to lead us through a county admin building discussion and we'll have questions.
All right, well, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Nicole, Assistant County Manager. I am here to give you an update on the county administration building. And so it's been a while since we talked about it. I think last time we talked about county administration building was December of 2021, but I'm happy to be here today and give you these updates. Before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about the background and history of the county administration building. So I want to preface this with saying that we didn't actually go out and start looking for a county administration building. How this started was there was a need for space, and there was a need for space for our public safety programs. And that was district court, VA, and sheriff. And there was really I would say, an urgent need for space from the DA that we were hearing. And so we did a programming space study for these programs. And what came out of that was a square footage need of about 47,000 square feet. And that was done in 2017. And you'll see that on the slide, how that breaks out for those programs. And so the commission made a decision in 2019 to do a CIP project to help create space in the courthouse, which we knew we would have to create space in the courthouse for these programs. There was no other place to send the DA and to send district court for that space. So what we did with the CIP project was we moved adult detention over to, let me back up. We moved the sheriff that could move over to the detention facility. And so we repurposed some vacant space that was at the detention facility on the first floor. That was in the former inmate visitation area. And then we also did a small facility expansion on there. It was about 7,100 square feet. So that total project was just a little bit over 6 million. And what that did was that created space in the courthouse. The space that it created was on the second and third floor of the courthouse. And so that was on the east end. And that created a little bit over, I think, 9,000 square feet on both of those floors. We were able to move district attorney into that space. And so what that did was it then started to make movement for space for the DA. So fast forward a little bit to where we are today. You all, the commission, approved the first floor traffic courtroom on first floor. That was approved with COVID response funding of about 1.17 million. So that started our first courtroom for district court. We are also currently working on 4 additional courtrooms, and that's a project that we're working on right now. That is a $9.3 million project. Again, that's creating 4 courtrooms for district court. So that creates a courtroom on 7th floor, 2 courtrooms on 8th floor, an additional courtroom on 9th floor, and then appellate space for 3 magistrates on the 11th floor. And then it finishes out 2nd and 3rd floor of the county courthouse for the DA. Now, what that does is this basically satisfies district court space and DA space for the long haul. So it takes care of them, I would say, for probably over the next at least 10 years for their space needs. Now, we did that. We were able to create that space by moving out admin services. So we moved, as you well know, we moved admin services into the Russian building. We started that June of last year. We moved out finance, county clerk, county counselor's office, county manager, strategic communications, county commission, county treasurer, and register of deeds. And we were able to finish that October of last year. And then what you'll see tomorrow on your agenda is a lease approval for human resources to be able to move them into this space. And if we're able to do that, it should take us about 90 days. So they should be in this building hopefully June of 2023.
Did this also take care of completely the sheriff's team?
It did. I will tell you, with the addition of courtrooms, they're probably going to need a little bit extra space just to be able to support those additional courtrooms with judicial needs. So we'll probably have to give them a little bit of space in the court tower. Not very much though. Sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the county administration building review. So for the county county administration programming, we did this again back in October 2017. We did space programming for these departments. Again, I just named these off, but I'll do it again. County clerk, commission, county counselor, county manager, facilities, finance, human resources, records management, register of deeds, county treasurer. This would basically encompass who would be in the county administration building. Now you see asterisks by finance and human resources. That's because we recently did programming with these two departments because right now they're doing what we would call a hybrid remote sort of, I don't know what you would call it, but basically they are doing a function of hybrid remote where some of their people are coming in and some of them are remote. And so we just kind of did a reprogramming with them and their square footage reduced between finance and human resources. So when you see the January 2023, that refers to finance and human resources. Otherwise, everybody has stayed the same. The square footage that I'm referring to, that's current square footage, that refers to what their square footage was in the courthouse. And again, the numbers on the right are their program square footage need. On the bottom, we're including a lobby. CP stands for courthouse police. That's the screening that we would have. And then we wanted to add a cafeteria or a cafe. That in total, including all three of those, that's 3,500 square feet. So in total, when we go to look for a county administration building, we're looking for the tenant area, 61,600 square feet. When we're looking for a building in whole, so gross area, we're looking for an 84,400 square foot building. That includes 37% circulation. And circulation includes common core spaces such as mechanical rooms, stairs, elevators, public corridors, and restrooms. So again, in total, we're looking for just under an 85,000 square foot building, or if we build new, we would be building an 85,000 square foot building. Okay, so we want to review options of what we're thinking or considering for a county admin building. So I always put this up there because we always want to consider what we have for existing space. As I go through that, I will explain why it's not a viable option. Leasing long-term, do we want to consider leasing long-term in the Ruffin building as we're here right now? Existing buildings, I'll talk about what we know for existing buildings that are out there, if we want to do a renovation or remodel, and then I'll discuss new construction. So county buildings, I always want to consider the low-cost option. And so for county buildings, what we have out there is historic courthouse. So there will be a tentative vacancy if we were able to find an elections building, and that would give us a little bit under 8,000 square feet. Munger, that is just recently vacant, and so that's just under 10,000 square feet. Courthouse annex, that will become, I say tentative because that will become vacant when we move the DA out of that space of the annex into the second and third floor of the courthouse tower. And then ComCare Crisis, when we're able to expand and move them out of their current space, then that becomes tentative 15,000 square feet for the entire building. So I will tell you that won't work for our county admin building because all that collectively is 49,000 square feet. But then you go back into we're all going to be displaced into all these different locations. So that won't work because it doesn't collectively put us into one building, a county admin building. But what I will consider is, will any of these vacant square footage work for any potential leases? Previously, we talked about pretrial and drug court. When they were at the Harry Street location, they were in 11,070 square feet. And so we had talked about maybe they would be a good potential candidate for the courthouse annex, along with the sheriff ORU, which is a vendor registration unit. They are currently out at Harry Street. So they're 2,600 square feet. Maybe those two could possibly work in the courthouse annex. And then we have ComCare Outpatient Services, 15,000 square feet, ComCare Children's Services. I have not talked to Tim or Joan, but maybe those two are possibly good candidates for ComCare Crisis. So these are just the things that, facilities and I think through as we look at vacant buildings. Lease option. So currently we are in the Ruffin building. We're paying $16 a square foot. We're leasing 43,000 square feet through June 30th of 2025. If you approve HR to come over, then that increases that square foot to 51,000 square feet. Our annual cost is just a little bit over $700,000. With HR coming over, it will be a little over $800,000 annually. One-time cost, we estimate that to be 1.2 million. That included networking, signage, the construction remodel, movers, access control to bring our cubicles over, and then architectural and engineering design. So we're spending ARPA funding until the end of 2024, and then at renewal, as part of our lease, our square footage cost would go up to $18 a square foot. Okay, and then existing buildings that are out there. So I reached out to our on-call real estate broker just to find out if there's anything that he's seeing out there that would be new to the market, anything that we've looked at before. So there is the Murphin building that's out there. Currently, they are marketing that at $8.5 million. That includes 250 North Water. And then I confirmed with him yesterday that also includes 221 North Main. So 2 buildings there for $8.5 million. He did not bring this up, but I'm bringing this up because this is something that we've looked at before. And as we begin to discuss admin building, they will reach out to us. And that is the Riverview building. However, that is, as I understand from the Wichita Business Journal, that is 80% occupied as of January of 2023. So I'm not sure that that's really an option. 2 other options that our real estate broker told us about is the Wesley Rehab Hospital, which is at 13th and Tyler. That's a 91,700 square foot building. And we have 176 parking stalls. One other one that I didn't make it into the PowerPoint because it came in late yesterday. 125 North Market, that's the New York Life building. 480,000 square feet, and they are marketing that at 11.5 million. So 480,000 square feet on that building. So I don't have a chance to see that. I'm just holding this up here, commissioners. So that is what is out there for. Yes, sir.
So also in the Business Journal this week, Riverview, didn't they just sign a bunch of leases?
They may have on it. Yeah, they're not in my head. I didn't see that, but
yeah,
I know that in January they said there was 80% occupancy. Okay, so we're going to move into the new construction option. So 3rd and Main, there's a new concept out there that I want to talk about. Then there is a Garvey Center proposal. And then I'm going to go back over the courthouse complex from December 2021. There was about 4 different options there that we talked about. So 3rd and Main, this is a new concept. And I'm a little bit excited about this option because it takes off the $5.2 million parking garage that we talked about last time. So if you'll indulge me just a little bit. So this option, and you've looked at this before. So this piece right here is our new admin building. Well, we put that right there at the corner of 3rd and Main. But what this does is this looks at 2-lane traffic going east and west on 3rd Street. And then, of course, you see Main here. But what this does is this takes those 2 lanes out and it translates it into on-street parallel parking, which adds 40 parking spaces here on 3rd. Then we would also consider the option of having the south row, so this row up here, as parking. So that adds 32 parking spaces there. What we would do then here is have congruent spaces here between Reagan, and that adds 83 spaces here, 62 here, 29 here. You've got 16 parking spaces here at Reagan. And then we would approach Mr. Ruffin and see if he would be willing to sell us this parcel of land right here next to Epic, giving us 45 parking spaces here. And so that would give us a total of 307 parking stalls there. And again, that takes away the need for a parking garage at 5.2 million. Okay, I'm gonna move on unless there's any questions on that.
Well, I guess I do have a question. So is county own this land now, or would it be purchasing land?
No, so we own, I think up to here, so this is the Reagan building. This parcel right here is owned by the city of Wichita. And then this parcel right here is owned by.
And I guess we talked to the city of Wichita that they would be interested in selling that.
I'm gonna refer to.
A couple of years ago, we approached the city and they would have. But that's where we left. On negotiation.
And I will tell you that I talked to John Seifert, who was my contact for Mr. Ruffin, and he said they would be interested. Okay, so this is the Garvey Center proposal. We heard from Mr. Weber, who represents this proposal, the owners for this proposal. So I want you to just kind of pay attention here to the parking lot right here at the corner of First and Water. So up to this parking garage and then up to the Garvey Center. So their proposal there is that they would sell us this parcel right here at $12 a square foot. And I think that's about 30,000 square feet. And so roughly about $360,000. And then they would build this parking garage and provide us with 200 spaces there. And they said that the construction and ownership could be negotiated for that parking garage. And so essentially we would, of course, build our own building there at our cost, of course, but they would, again, sell us that parcel of land. And then the parking garage they would build, but the ownership and the cost of construction there would be negotiated. They provided this rendering of, you know, what it could look like. This is Water Street. This is First over here. And then this is another piece of the rendering, and this is the parking garage here. Okay, and then I'll move on to courthouse complex options that we talked about back in December of 2021. Okay, so there was option one. Okay, let me just orient you. This is the courthouse tower. This is the annex. This is the parking behind here. And then I think we're getting closer to the jail over here. So this option was to demo the annex and then build new 4-story there. That was one option. Option 1A was to keep the annex and build the 4-story over the annex. So the annex stays in this option. Option 2, again, in this option, the annex stays here, but then we would build the 3-story behind the annex. And then we would have to close, I think, Elm Street here. And I think when we talked previously, I think our on-call architect, Justin Grant, who works with us on this, wasn't very keen to this idea. I think he was worried about just this fire apparatus turnaround, and I think he just thought there was going to be some challenges with the footprint there. This option, I noticed I put this in there, but I think that we actually cut this out because it impedes the jail expansion master plan, that this was one option we looked at. This is to the north of the jail, and we would build a 4-story there. But like I said, I think we actually cut that out because of it doesn't, this does not allow the jail to expand if it ever expands. Option 4, then this goes back to 3rd Main, that again, this had the parking garage on this part here. Okay, so going into costs, I had a conversation with Justin Graham, again, our on-call architect. What he's figuring out in the market right now is that new construction costs are about $350 to $375 a square foot. Remodel costs are about $175 a square foot, but he said that that excludes any major mechanical, roof, or window repairs. And he also said that can fluctuate depending on age and condition of building. So I also included life cycle cost analysis. I think as we get into discussion and any recommendations that we look into, I think we need to consider acquisition, and that's land and building, construction, whether that's new and existing, and other costs that we need to consider are operation, maintenance, repair, replacement of systems or equipment, debt issuance costs, and we can hear from Lindsay on that, and then resale or disposal. I think the disposal is kind of moot. I think, this will be an asset. So if it's something that we can't reuse later for a county building, I think we would certainly resell that. You've seen the slide before. This goes back to when we were looking at buildings, the input that we heard from our stakeholders. So all those 10 departments, what they heard or what they told us is we asked them to give us information and fill out a survey for us. What's important to them is that these buildings have convenience to the public, that there is collaboration between all those 10 departments, that there is function and efficiency in the layout in the building, and that there is safety and security for the public and for employees. So that concludes my PowerPoint, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and of course, leave it open to you for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Tanya, for updating us, updating Sheriff, the new commissioner, and maybe even updating Sarah a little bit. Good. We kind of did hit the pause button and everything COVID and hit us. Thanks for that update. Any comments so far, questions? Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. We've been talking about an admin building for about 6 years now. And unfortunately, the cost of doing anything with interest rates continue to go up. And so whatever decision we make today would have been cheaper if we'd made it 6 years ago. So any delay at this point, it's going to be cheaper today than it is 6 years from now if we keep kicking it down the line. So it's time for us to quit talking about it and start making some decisions. If we're looking at the future, I see consolidation as a possibility. And if we're going to consolidate government here in Sedgwick County, we need some place that is close so that we can consolidate in a very practical matter. So really, I see 2 options, and I think we need to get down to 2 options. And that way the commission can come back together. And I think the Murphy building is an option, but we need actual costs of the Murphy building. We see $8 million to buy that building, but we need cost of what it takes to remodel a building. And again, one thing that I talk about every time is life cycle costs. And what's it going to cost for a roof, air conditioning, elevators, all the different things that go into making sure that this building works for the future. In addition, you're going to have to add cost for a meeting room because there is not adequate space inside of the Murphy building to build anything. You're going to have to add costs for dismantling that building over on Main Street. is a total disaster. So we need the actual costs of that project all the way through. The second project that I think we need actual costs on is Third Main. When Commissioner Lopez and I were chair and pro tem, we did broach the subject with the mayor and with vice mayor. And they are willing to sell it to us. The asking cost is about $1 million, but they said that's negotiable. But what does that do for us if we go to build something at Third and Main? First of all, we've already got the Ruffin building right there. We've got the city hall right straight across the street. We've got the courthouse just down the street. We've got the historical courthouse right there. And we have a government complex downtown. And the problem that I see often is that people come to one building expecting services and we say, oh, that's over in the city. And so we send them over to the city. And that's not very user-friendly to the city. So I want numbers that we can take a look at that are costs for the next 50 years. Because we got to look at life cycle costs. And a new building is going to start off very low at life cycle costs and then go up. An old building is going to start very high at life cycle costs. And hopefully when everything is renovated, it will start coming down. We need to compare apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So I think it's time to make a decision. It was time to make a decision earlier. Any days that we delay are going to cost us more money. And now is the time for us to move forward and quit talking about it and start taking some action. So that's my point.
Yes, sure. Thank you. What's on the Ruffin building, when we finish the lease term here at the end of 24?
25.
At the end of 25?
Yes, it's 30 of this one.
So we go from $16 square foot to $18 square foot. Are we required to move into an option period with a specified term that we have to fulfill, or?
I think, I don't know if I remember. I think we have a 90-day holdover, and then, do you remember the other term?
I'd have to look at the lease again.
Yeah.
I think we got a one-time 6-month extension is what I believe, and they wouldn't commit to anything more than that because they want to. That was pretty much. I'll get you that. Thank you.
So ARPA funding runs out with the use of ARPA funding to pay for this lease.
December
The use of
31st.
ARPA funding, we can enter contracts through the end of 2024. And then if we are, for example, constructing a building or something, we can continue to use those funds toward that contract as long as the work is completed and the costs are paid by December 31, 2026.
Makes sense.
So, but for a lease, it's questionable, pretty questionable that we would be able to continue to use ARPA past forward.
So we have a financial interest. We have an efficiency interest and a financial interest to get the shovels in ground relatively quick. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. So all of the proposals on here, most of the last pages here are new construction. If they're in the 85,000, 90,000 square foot range, based on the number that's given here, 350, 375, we're looking roughly pretty close to $30 million for this construction bill. That doesn't include acquisition costs or parking lot costs or demolition of whatever happens to be there in the current. So we're looking at 30 million, and yet in FF&E and bond and interest, all that. I think you're looking at significantly more than $30 million in any of those options. And the time to build, correct me if I'm wrong, you're probably looking at least at 24, probably more like 36 months to design and build something, right? So to me, those are all negatives. Again, I do think, I agree with Commissioner Dennis, it would be nice to have a building like that, but I think the costs are clearly higher and the length of time to get in the building is much, much longer. There's only, look at the existing buildings on here that you potentially purchase and repurpose these. The one at 13th and Tyler is not downtown. I think we've talked at length about whether the building should be downtown or not. I think we've all agreed, for the most part, the downtown was preferred. So to me, the 13th and Tyler is taking itself off the list. The building, the 125 North Market, is much too large. We don't need a building that large. I think the life cycle costs to own a building that large, I think it's just much more complicated than what we need. To me, that should take it off the list because of that alone. And then Riverview, I personally like the Riverview building, but as you said, it's occupied. It takes a lot more time to get into the building. And life cycle costs, I think Commissioner Dennis has hammered this point on that building. It's got a lot of problems going into the building on the elevators, the windows and things like that. So that leaves, if you will, the Merkin building. And the purchase price is reasonable. The surface parking is reasonable. It's downtown. And you could probably, I would think that with 23 months until the option here at the Ruffin building is fading away, that 23 months is a reasonable period of time to potentially get into that building. So this building stands out of all the options. That building stands out as being the one we should probably take a look at. I would like to see us hone in on the actual costs, find out what it would take to do that.
Commissioner Howell, if you recall, I had done, I think last year, a timeline, and we looked at existing building versus new, and there wasn't that much difference between the time it takes to get into existing versus new. And I can send that spreadsheet. I think it was maybe 31, 32 months versus 36 months. And I'm happy to send that spreadsheet to you. We worked with our on-call architect on that.
One thing that Commissioner Dennis did say was we probably need to have meeting space. And again, I agree that may be the biggest problem. But as it's an existing building that's in pretty good shape, we've all toured the building. I don't think it's going to take a huge amount of money to get it ready for a use. I mean, Ruffin building didn't take that long. I don't think this building is terrible shape. I don't think we have to go in there and gut the building or anything like that. I think that you can probably use much of the building as is. And so the meeting space may be a more problem, but we have City Hall across the street. We could potentially use our meeting space. We could probably find other temporary space if we need to. To me, that should not be a reason not to move forward. And again, I think that existing space is much shorter timeline. I know you say it's about the same, but that's assuming that the building's in terrible shape. If you have to gut the building to start over, I would agree it would take longer. But this building's in pretty good shape. It's office space today, and almost all of this 80,000 square feet we need is office space.
Commissioner Lopez?
I agree that we need to try to keep it as close to the city as possible if we're looking at any kind of potential consolidation between governments in the future. If we move further away from them, that's really not going to be helpful to that. I'm very curious still about 3rd and Main. I know Commissioner Dennis mentioned that we had talked to Mayor and Vice Mayor a lot about that last year, and that's definitely something that's still really high on my list. But then if this other building is an option as well, I mean, let's look into that and see what those costs are going to be, long-term costs. So we're not saying that, if we do a new construction, obviously the upfront costs are going to be more expensive. And so I just don't want to compare it to a lower cost that's going to end up costing even more long-term if we do something that's already there. So I just want to make sure that we're very clear on long-term costs associated with new versus existing. And go from there. But I think either one, if the price is right, would be an option.
And throw a little wrinkle in here. I think as long as we're trying to get an estimated cost, like you just did the math on new construction, I think it'd be respectful that the Garvey Center give us a ballpark. It does seem to be a little out of play, Larry, but I'm not sure. I think it's just worth knowing. It's a, oh my gosh moment, if you want to look into that. And I assume it's been kind of a little dialogue about the Rounds and Porter building with the city, but is that kind of off the table probably?
I'll let the manager speak.
That makes it a lot more complex, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Much more difficult than any of the options.
And finally, I would say, based on discussion, I think we also ought to include what a long-term lease would look like here, a continuation. What long-term means. If we're talking about, I would agree that eventually consolidated government is in the future. So a long-term lease, while that may evolve into some kind of consolidated government, or continued consolidated services, like we've been doing the last 8 years or so with some departments. it might be a safer price tag that we continue on it. We have moved in, we've all felt what this looks like now, and see departments that are working and public access on the first floor. And this one seems to work nicely for me while we're trying to decide this. So we're gonna have a follow-up of the costs, life cycle costs, all these things we're talking about. I think it'd be nice to see, including the cost of new construction, what the annual bond payment, interest at least, not the principal, but what the bond payment would be to analyze versus what we're at. I'm not doing any defining this. I am throwing a couple of wrinkles out there, but I think respectfully, Garvey Center and long-term lease should be included in an analysis.
Thank you. I haven't considered a long-term lease because we're looking at $1 million a year to lease this facility. And it does not make any sense whatsoever to me to take general funds and spend $1 million a year for rented space when we can take that $1 million a year and apply it towards a permanent facility. So we can look at it, but what my worry is that every time that we've got to this point in the past, we keep adding more options to it, and then we kick the can down the road. We need to hone in on a couple of options and then do a deep dive on a couple of options and make a decision. Instead of saying, oh, let's add this, oh, let's add this. That we've done over and over again, and it hasn't worked.
I respect that. I think a $30 million bond, doing quick math interest, first year or two is $2 to $2.5 million, something like that. So just in interest alone on a $30 million bond, be $2.5 million of general fund dollars versus 800,000 or 900,000 that same few years while this discussion. So it's just a little difference.
But eventually we own it and we don't have that debt. The other thing is if you're looking at a very top quality remodel or a new build, we can take a look at things that we had never thought of in the past, like energy efficiency. What can we do to build this new building or to remodel a building so that it meets the latest standards so that we can reduce our costs for operating this building over the future. So I don't want to keep kicking this can down the road by coming up with ideas. I want to hone in on a couple of ideas and move forward.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, to Commissioner Dennis's point, I think that if you're looking at $30 million in construction costs, add in acquisition costs, preparation costs, and FF&E and interest on the bonds. Look, I think we can get to $50 million pretty quickly. So I look at it as a new build. I don't care if it's over the DA annex or if it's Third and Main or if it's over at the Garvey Center area. I think you're still looking at $50 million, three different ways. I think it's $50 million. The one building that is the least expensive and the fastest building to get into is one that's existing. It's in good shape. And I don't think personally, I'm not interested in a long-term lease. I don't think I'll ever come on board with that. And I'm not sure I'll ever come on board with a new build. For the very reason I just spoke about. The one thing that I think we ought to be looking at, I would like to see us do a deep dive on is what's that? If you want to do a new building, pick one, Third and Main. Sounds like our two commissioners talk about Third and Main. Do a deep dive, come up with the cost on Third and Main. And I think that would be, if other commissioners want to do that, to me, that's reasonable. I'm not personally interested, but I think it's reasonable to spend some time on that since it's kind of a new idea. But I think a deep dive on the Murphy building to compare it with, to get us to a couple of options so we can hopefully move forward. I would think in a month, we would have some data. We can hopefully make a decision sometime soon, but we don't have lots of time. I think that for us to get this down to a couple of options to show us what a new construction looks like versus an existing building, I think that's the two you should look at and bring that back to us in a month. Hopefully we can make a decision to move us forward.
Yeah, I think
Commissioner's point, or how this is saying that we simply don't have a lot of time to waste anymore. So I would say that we narrow the scope to two, maybe three. Chairman wants to keep Garvey in there to get some numbers or an estimate of sorts. I think we narrow it to Third and Main, we narrow it to Merkin Building. The chair wants to keep Garvey in that conversation. I have no problem with that. And at the same meantime, we can talk about what a long-term situation looks like here, so we know. I don't know if we'll have support from the commission to do that, but I think we've got to narrow this thing down to 2 or 3 properties, and we've got to move relatively quickly and put a timeline internally, where we say we need to have a decision made by X date. I think it would behoove this commission to do it.
Chairman, can I throw something into?
Sure.
Okay. So I apologize. So at your retreat on Friday the 17th, now we will have a block of time where we're going to talk about all of the like large picture CIP projects that are still coming as well. And we'll do kind of a primer on debt and how and what that looks like, because I do agree time is of the essence with regard to an admin building, but you have a lot of other competing things out there for your conversation and discussion that I think will play into this. So that will be the next part of it. So I think for some of this conversation, we can try and have at least some of the financial information prepared at a very high level. I can hope get some costs, whatever cost estimates we have, and give you some of those ideas and what interests would look like in this climate. We just paid 3.3% interest on the bond issuance we did for roads and bridges last November. We know that the feds have increased rates. We know that we still have a very competitive AAA credit rating on our debt. But it's still, you're right, the longer we wait, the more cost there's going to be to doing this. And there's going to be art to how we do this because of the large costs involved regardless of which option you pick. So there will be more information to come on this to help you inform your
Out of courtcy, we have independent elected offices also a part of this, and some of them are in the audience. Do you have anything you want to add, Treasurer?
I don't know how much to add, but I think that you'll get this down in 2 options we just looked at, because there's a lot of difference between renovating a building and trying to fit your office into it versus building a building that your office fits into. So get that concept. So those are a couple options we'd like to see. If we have get down to 2 options, we'll be able to give you a better idea of what we're working with.
I agree with 2 options would be a good idea for us. But I also want you to take into account that from what we've seen so far with the register of deeds, the treasurer being on the same floor at a convenient location for the citizens, I think we need to look at that for the clerk, the register of deeds, the appraiser included, all of us on the same floor. And I think that's easy access for the public. Our offices are the ones that they tend to go to more frequently. So I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind, that we need something where it's easily accessible to all the public. Not, I think when we toured the Merkin building, I don't know if that first floor could fit all of us. I'm not an architect, so I don't know how that space could turn out, but I think that's important to keep in mind.
Mark, do you have anything? Bill? Yes.
Yes, public service is very important in our business. And I think being co-located is going to be very important. We've looked at efficiency and so forth. I think that if we don't do this, it's going to be something bad, because down at Ruffin, we're happy down there, but parking continues to be a problem. We know that we have people going to the treasurer's office, people going to the tag office, they come into our office, they're having to continue to move around. It's a problem. It causes people to blow up. Think we're giving the courthouse shuffle. We need to work together. So we all need to be in sync.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
Can I ask Mark a question? If you look at the diagram, why the parking is expanded in order to be able to take care of Reagan and the new court complex at 3rd and Main. Do you have to be in the same building, or across the parking lot's not sufficient?
It would be nice to be in the same building. We could make it work so that we could remain in right Ronald Reagan, but I think that the most efficient way of handling that service is to be a workplace.
Well, this is first I've heard about putting the appraiser in the same building. We've been discussing this.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm just looking at the lineup here and determining if we couldn't pull again. I think we could flip some things around. Somebody has to go over to Reagan and bring the appraiser on board. Their argument's sound. I mean, there's a lot of inner workings of business between those four entities. The appointed appraiser, the real elected. We'll take it.
Okay, well, this is new information. I've never heard this before.
I'll just start. The Reagan's always had a parking problem. He was promoted. We would not have a parking problem, but we decided to go down that path, and we do have a parking problem. So we know that he was underestimated how much the parking problem was going to be. And I think we ought to go ahead and solve that problem, whether we take a third of the main building or not. If that piece of property is available for us to purchase for 45 spaces, we probably ought to go and take a look at that no matter what happens to the end.
Commissioner Lopez, you got any additional thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I shared kind of where I was thinking anyway, and that's where I remain. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other closing? Okay. Larry, you're the only one here that's.
Hey, I got a meeting room with 200 seats in it, so
Okay.
it's available.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, so let me just make sure I recap. You want me to come back in 30 days, looking at what the costs are for Murphin and Third and Main. And also maybe come back with what the lease, a long-term lease cost might look like, and then also include Garvey Center. Did I capture that?
Here's my only technical question on that. When we really want to dive into a building, we really want to dive into, as we did Riverview back 4 or 5 years ago, do we have to come up with some type of contract with them or agreement so that we can gain access to do the probing needed so we get accurate costs? Can we do that in 30 days?
No, but I didn't know if I could bring that up at this.
I mean, I just think realistically, if we really want to do a deep dive on Murphy, I'm hearing a lot of support to do that. I think we ought to reach out.
What we've done before in the past is we've put a purchase agreement.
We have to do that.
Right. They have to bless that formally.
Yeah.
Going on 30 days is.
Well, I mean, I think what we could do is maybe in 30 days, is come up with costs that may not be diving in actually.
Estimates.
Correct.
Can we come up with estimates? I just want to make sure we're meeting here.
Maybe just talk to the pro tem, maybe we do an off agenda item related to that, so we can do any kind of formal approval, next steps.
We don't currently have a CIP project that's authorized for this, so I think we need to do that first. We have a process we have to follow, and so I don't mean to speak for Mike. I think we need to have that followed and adhere to, and then we can have that. So we can work on setting that.
I agree. I think. Yeah. Okay. So maybe 30 days. But at least the steps. Let's get the steps. Yeah. Anything else?
I don't understand.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here. A little bit lengthy, but had a couple topics that were well worth discussing. Thank you. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Right. We're adjourned.